Summer of '44. The Wehrmacht's elite are losing their minds to primal terror. Picture this: 46 tons of Soviet steel creeping silently toward a sleeping camp. One move, and the enemy would have been ground into a bloody pulp. But this crew chose a more sophisticated form of psychological torture. They left something so gruesome, just 4 inches from a German sentry's face, that an entire tank unit deserted in a panic the next morning. What kind of sentence made the occupiers go gray with fear? The payoff will blow your mind. Watch until the end. Night over the Belarusian forests is shattered by a blinding flash. June 1944. Operation Bagration. The hollow, guttural roar of a 152mm gun howitzer snaps the trunks of ancient pines. The recoil of the massive weapon jars 46 tons of armored steel. 43 kilograms of metal and high explosives pierce the black void. Impact. A 152mm concrete-piercing shell slams into the hull. The multi-ton turret of a heavy German tank is ripped from its ring with a shriek. The screech of tearing Krupp steel is drowned out by the monstrous roar of the ammunition rack detonating. The thunder of explosions and the grinding of metal. This is the dry, dirty, grueling work of professionals. A steel sledgehammer hitting crystal. Inside the cramped fighting compartment of the Soviet self-propelled gun, a thick, blue-gray fog of propellant gases hangs in the air. 4 men work as a single, ruthless mechanism. Faces are blackened with soot. Hands are bloodied and bruised. The loader, breathing heavily, rams the next separate loading shell into the breach. The stench of burnt powder mixes with the acrid aroma of scorched diesel fuel. A continuous ringing from the heavy gun's blasts fills their ears. No emotions. Exhaustion has burned out their nerves, leaving only night vision and ingrained muscle memory. Soviet doctrine birthed these machines as mobile pillboxes designed to grind down the enemy's elite. And right now, this steel predator pulses to the rhythm of its nameless crew's hearts. Day is a grueling wait in an ambush camouflaged by branches. Night is the time for the lethal strike. Morning reveals the consequences of the night's purge. Dawn creeps across the scorched clearings. A German forward patrol slowly emerges onto a forest road. Tractor engines stall. Wehrmacht soldiers freeze. Before them lies a column of elite heavy armored vehicles. They are dead. Every machine has been destroyed by surgically precise hits directly to the turrets. Armor smashed inward. The melted, jagged edges of the shell holes gape with absolute blackness. The metal still holds the heat of the lethal strike. Major von Ludwig jumps heavily to the ground. His boots crunch over fused slag and shattered periscope glass. He approaches the remains of the lead tank. War is dirt, sweat, and deafening thunder. Here, the raw physics of armor penetration reigns supreme. The thickness of elite German armor meant absolutely nothing here. The crushing kinetic energy of a concrete-piercing shell weighing over 90 pounds simply annihilated the barrier. The major lowers his gaze. His face pales. The ground around the dozens of knocked-out steel giants is virgin clean. Not a single trace of wide tank treads. No broken branches from heavy equipment retreating. The destroyer came from nowhere. It did its job, and it dissolved into the gloom without a sound. A chilling uncertainty grips the veteran officer's throat. The mind refuses to accept the obvious facts. They haven't run into a regular army. They've run into a ghost. The contrast between the mountains of mangled, dead armor and the total absence of the attacker's tracks breaks the psyche.
Hysterical panic thrashes in the field radio operator's headset. The airwaves are choked with the cracking screams of flank sentries. "The column is completely destroyed! No enemy losses! We can't see the enemy!"
"He vanished into the earth!" Major von Ludwig's voice sounds dry, but a taut string of primal animal fear vibrates within it. "Belay that panic on the net. Scour the forest square by square immediately. Look for heavy equipment. Look for firing positions. Execute." But there is nothing to find. The Belarusian forests have turned into the perfect labyrinth for an ambush, a place where the geometry of the landscape dictates the terms of survival. The structure of such ambushes is no accident. It is a mathematically calculated death sentence. Pre-calculated fire sectors, filigreed distance estimation, rigid gun stabilization, shot, recoil, instant change of position before the dust settles and the smoke clears. The forest maintains a deathly silence. The enemy is paralyzed with horror. The German elite are shocked by the undeniable fact of the mangled, dead steel that only yesterday was considered invulnerable. Fear of the invisible executioner spreads through the ranks of the occupiers. But the coming day brings them neither salvation nor clarity. The air between the pines begins to thicken rapidly. The dampness of the lowlands rises. A thick, impenetrable morning fog slowly descends upon the scorched forest. A thick, impenetrable morning fog erases the boundaries of reality. A milky shroud swallows sounds, turning the Belarusian village into an isolated zone. A Wehrmacht motorized infantry punitive action begins with businesslike pedantry. The drop sides of half-track armored personnel carriers clang. German soldiers herd the villagers toward the center. The usual, brutal routine of the occupying power. They are certain of their absolute impunity. They are shielded by thin bulletproof armor and high rate of fire machine guns. They have no idea that from the thick gray haze, the cold eye of a telescopic sight is already watching them intently. Inside the 46-ton steel box, icy focus reigns. Heavy work requires total control over every muscle. Sweat pours into eyes, stinging skin covered in a thick layer of propellant soot, burnt oil, and metal dust. The breathing of the four men is steady, measured. Motor skills are honed to the level of instinct. War does not tolerate haste. War recognizes only lethal automatism and brutal efficiency. The commander is glued to the panoramic sight. Targets in the fire sector are assigned. The gunner's fingers rest on the cold hand wheels of the traversing and elevating mechanisms. No doubts, no mercy. Range 400, high explosive, fire! The commander's voice is devoid of the slightest emotion. It is a dry, clipped statement of fact. The tactical problem is identified. The objective is set. The massive sliding block breech of the heavy gun howitzer clangs open. The loader, his tendons strained to the limit, takes a 43-kilogram high-explosive shell. The metal chills his scorched hands. In one fluid motion, he hurls this deadweight into the open breech. Following the multi-kilogram shell, a heavy brass casing with the propellant charge goes in. A sharp click. Fire. The fog explodes with blinding yellow flame. The hollow, rolling blast of the 152mm gun hammers the eardrums, threatening to tear them to shreds. The brutal recoil of the massive barrel shakes the entire hull of the self-propelled gun. The conveyor belt of death has been launched. The shell traverses 400 meters of void in a fraction of a second. A direct hit on the lead armored personnel carrier. For such a monstrous caliber, the thin 15mm German sloped armor is nothing more than wet paper. The detonation of the 43-kilogram mass rips the vehicle into shapeless chunks. A colossal shockwave sweeps away the enemy infantry, snapping bones, and turning shredded metal into screaming, lethal shrapnel. A pillar of fire, mixed with clods of earth, rises over the village. Same target. Fire! The second shot merges with the fading echo of the first. The loader works like a soulless hydraulic piston. A blown-out back, palms rubbed raw and bloody, all of it dissolves completely in the boiling adrenaline of the short-lived engagement. The powerful extractor ejects the smoking, spent casing with a clang onto the metal-strewn floor of the fighting compartment. Foul, suffocating propellant gases instantly fill the cramped cabin. The vent fan howls at its limit, but physically cannot handle such a volume of poison. The crew greedily breathes this toxin, ignoring the burning in their throats. The second German vehicle turns into a blazing gasoline torch. The engine shatters in all directions in a spray of white-hot crankcase fragments. Animal panic instantly paralyzes the executioners. They scream, tearing their voices, and fire blindly, drenching the gray haze in a continuous stream of lead. Long machine gun bursts scratch uselessly at the thick frontal armor of the invisible monster, kicking up only harmless showers of sparks. This is the blind rage of those condemned to death. They see no clear silhouette. They see only regular, blinding flashes, carving the blurred outlines of a steel predator out of the thick fog. The third armored personnel carrier desperately tries to turn around on the narrow dirt road. The Wehrmacht driver yanks the control levers in a panic. Too late. Another heavy, high-explosive shell smashes the engine compartment into fine steel grit. The shockwave easily flips the mangled, multi-ton wreck. The slaughter in the fog takes only a matter of minutes. The elite punitive detachment ceases to exist as a combat unit. Burning, torn metal smolders with thick, oily black smoke that slowly mixes with the whitish morning haze. The lethal task is cleanly executed. The commander strikes the driver heavily on his tensed shoulder. A sharp, ruthless lurch. 46 tons throw it into reverse. The heavy diesel engine growls hollowly, greedily swallowing liters of fuel. Wide steel tracks ruthlessly churn the damp forest soil, leading the self-propelled gun back into the safety of the thicket. Broken branches lash against the hot armor, reliably masking the retreat paths. The machine vanishes into the gloom as suddenly as it appeared. The perfect instrument for a night purge dissolves completely into the morning air, leaving behind only twisted heaps of vehicles and the primal animal terror of the surviving soldiers. The legend of the elusive, lethal shadow crawls through the German rear area garrisons like an incurable disease. Radio operators frantically transmit panicked reports of a phantom that strikes from absolute nothingness with a super-heavy caliber and never leaves behind any tread marks. Terror rapidly infects minds. True professionalism is the ability to impose paralyzing animal fear on the enemy long before direct fire contact even begins. The Soviet crew isn't thinking about the legends being born. In the cramped steel cabin, reeking of soot and acrid sweat, they simply catch their heavy breath. The deafening ringing in their ears fades very slowly, giving way to the steady, soothing thrum of the tank diesel at idle. The loader's hands shake violently from extreme muscular overstrain, but he is already mechanically wiping the next shells with a dry rag for the coming fight. The high-explosive rounds did their dirty work perfectly against thin armor and soft human flesh. Ahead of them lies a very different kind of steel. The German command cannot stomach the humiliating loss of tactical initiative. Total uncertainty is literally driving the staff officers insane. In protected bunkers, they nervously draw new red arrows on topographic maps. To guarantee the destruction of the steel ghost, the Wehrmacht makes a categorical decision to immediately pull an elite company of heavy tank destroyers into this grid square. The forest clearings are ready to turn into the perfect ambush. The forest clearings turn into the perfect place for an ambush. The German command cannot stomach the humiliating loss of tactical initiative and makes a categorical decision to immediately pull an elite company of heavy tank destroyers into this grid square. They are attempting to seize control of the territory. 88 millimeters of Krupp steel from long-barreled guns prowl hungrily, searching for the Phantom. The thick 80mm frontal armor of the heavy machines instills a deceptive confidence in the Wehrmacht crews. Carl Zeiss optics greedily scan every bush. The German command sets up its formations at the forest road junctions, believing that superiority in optics and armor penetration will secure their victory. They are used to being ruthless hunters. They have no idea that they have long since become doomed prey. The mechanics of a perfect ambush tolerate no improvisation or haste. It is raw, brutal mathematics multiplied by the absolute superiority of intellect and monstrous caliber over the enemy's numbers. The Soviet crew does not wait for the opponent to take up advantageous positions and deploy their long-barreled guns. They attack first. The distances to every possible landmark in the clearing were measured while it was still light. The fire sectors are assigned with icy calculation. The gunner has merged with the panoramic sight. Shifting the fire of the heavy ML-20S gun is the delicate work of a surgeon armed with a steel sledgehammer. Every movement of the traversing handwheel is calibrated to the millimeter. The slightest mistake means certain death for all four. 46 tons lie in wait in the thick brush, betraying themselves with not a single sound. The heavy diesel engine is completely shut down. Inside the sweltering cabin, an absolute ringing silence hangs, broken only by measured breathing. Already resting in the breach is 49 kilograms of pure death, a blunt-nosed, armor-piercing shell. This is a heavy tool for the ruthless opening of the toughest Krupp steel. The lead German vehicle crawls onto a pre-ranged landmark, the charred trunk of an old pine. Target in the crosshairs. Armor piercing. Fire! The gunner confirms readiness dryly, without a single unnecessary inflection. A short, sharp tug of the trigger. The night darkness snaps at the seams. A storm of fire from pre-ranged positions rains down on the enemy. The deafening roar of the 152mm gun howitzer hammers the eardrums, instantly compressing the air in the cramped cabin. The massive, heavy barrel recoils, snapping the branches of the camouflage. 49 kilograms of lethal metal pierce 300 meters of night void in an imperceptible fraction of a second. The impact shakes the earth. The armor-piercing shell slams into the frontal plate of the German tank destroyer. The physics of this process are merciless. The colossal kinetic energy of the impact doesn't just penetrate the thick armor. It smashes it inward as a giant chunk, kicking up a lethal hail of white-hot fragments that fly through the enemy's fighting compartment at the speed of a bullet. The detonated ammo rack rips the heavy casemate from its mounts, turning the elite crew to ash faster than the German tankers can even register the hit. First one's done. High explosive. Load. The gunner's voice sounds steady. No triumph. Only the confirmation of hard work completed. The loader, grunting from extreme muscular strain, rams a 43-kilogram high-explosive shell into the smoking breach. A brass casing with the propellant charge follows. The clang of the sliding block breach. His back muscles cramp. His rough hands slip from acrid sweat and gun grease, but the reload rate doesn't drop for a second. The automatism of cold-blooded professionals does not fail. Flashes of gunfire tear the night darkness to pieces. Animal panic erupts across the Wehrmacht radio net. Operators tear their voices in hysteria, trying to scream over the crackle of static and the thunder of explosions. "We are under fire! We're being picked off from nothingness! Give me coordinates! I can't see the flashes! Pulling back!" The second German vehicle tries to back up clumsily, crushing young trees under its treads. The driver is blinded by terror. In his panic, he exposes the vulnerable flank to the strike. Fire! Another crushing blow from the steel sledgehammer against thin glass. The heavy, high-explosive shell crumples the side armor of the German self-propelled gun, ripping the engine compartment to pieces. A blinding fireball illuminates the forest clearing. The enemy's best crews are destroyed in a matter of minutes, without ever seeing the silhouette of their executioner. War is no place for long reflection. It is the ruthless destruction of the opponent before he can lay his gun. The crew of the 152mm monster knows this better than anyone. The temperature in the cabin reaches its limit. Propellant gases sting their eyes, making them water, but the commander is already peering into the darkness, assessing the results of the purge. 2 bonfires smolder with thick black smoke. The smell of burnt human flesh and melting metal mixes with the scent of pine needles. The enemy is completely destroyed. The ambush worked perfectly. The commander gives the driver a short tap on the shoulder. The diesel engine comes to life with a low, guttural growl. 46 tons pivot in place, wide treads clanging against the churned earth. No emotions. The combat load is partially spent, and the night is far from over. Their path lies further, deep into the heart of the Belarusian forest. The radio is silent, but the commander knows. Somewhere out there, a few kilometers to the west, a heavy night battle is currently raging for an encircled group of partisans. The heavy night battle of the encircled partisan group is drowning in its own blood and swamp muck. The ring of the German cordon is tightening with the inevitability of a lethal steel press. The air hums with a continuous rain of lead. High rate of fire German machine guns spit out 1,200 rounds per minute, methodically mowing down the brush, along with human bodies. The defenders are nearly out of ammunition. The barrels of captured rifles have turned red hot. This is the brutal mathematics of the doomed. When the ammo runs out, human flesh inevitably gives way to metal. The next Wehrmacht motorized infantry attack is meant to be the last. The flashes of signal flares carve the gray silhouettes of the executioners out of the night gloom as they move in short rushes toward the center of the pocket. The ground suddenly begins to vibrate faintly. This mounting tremor is nothing like the heavy thuds of mortar rounds. It is the heavy, rhythmic pulse of a colossal mechanism. The low-frequency, guttural roar of a powerful tank diesel engine cuts through the dry clatter of the small arms fire. Out of the pitch-black darkness of the forest thicket, snapping the thick trunks of ancient trees like dry matches, a massive armored bulk rolls out. 46 tons of Soviet steel, heavily camouflaged with cut pine branches, crashes directly into the flank of the attacking German formations. This is no noble rescue operation. It is the systematic, methodical destruction of enemy manpower in a designated grid square. The self-propelled gun strikes on the move, without even slowing down. Wide caterpillar treads ruthlessly crush a forward fortified machine gun nest into the wet earth. The dull crunch of snapping bones and the piercing screech of tearing weapon metal are completely drowned out by the deafening roar of the 1,000-horsepower engine. The driver works the heavy levers hard, pivoting the multi-ton machine right on the spot. The steel behemoth grinds the remains of the enemy crew into a bloody mash mixed with mud. A short halt. Fractions of a second for precise aiming. A short exhale from the gunner. A hard tug of the trigger. Fire. The 152mm gun spits a blinding, retina-scorching plume of yellow flame into the darkness. 43 kilograms of high-explosive death slam into a dense cluster of German infantry at the edge of the forest clearing with a monstrous howl. A detonation of colossal power burns the oxygen for dozens of meters around the epicenter. The shockwave rips helmets off soldiers along with their heads. Heavy, white-hot shell fragments tear bodies into shapeless, bleeding fragments. The automatism of the cold-blooded professionals inside the machine does not fail. In the cramped, gas-filled cabin, the loader, biting his lip until it bleeds from the unbearable pain in his blown-out back, rams a new, heavy, high-explosive shell into the breech. A casing follows. The clang of the sliding block breach. Another shot shakes the armor. Another company of elite Wehrmacht motorized infantry is turned into a smoking, mangled mess of raw earth and torn flesh. Animal panic instantly breaks the orderly ranks of the executioners. The surviving Wehrmacht soldiers drop their personal weapons and, in a state of absolute terror, flee deep into the forest. They aren't trying to escape from men. They are running from a steel monster that is relentlessly crushing their tactical schemes. The gunfire abruptly ceases. A deafening, ringing silence presses painfully against the eardrums of the stunned partisans. The heavy armored behemoth sits motionless in the center of the mangled, smoking clearing. The long barrel of the massive gun howitzer smolders. A thick, suffocating cloud of blue-gray powder smoke and the acrid stench of burnt diesel billows from the open hatch of the armored casemate. Saving the partisan detachment was merely a byproduct, a random result of the methodical destruction of the enemy in this sector. The crew feels no joy, relief, or pride. Chronic fatigue and mild shell shock have long since numbed all human emotion. The Soviet SPG commander holds himself onto the hot armor, moving with a heavy, rolling gait. His tunic is soaked through with bitter salt sweat and thick, black gun grease. His face is a gruesome mask of soot, where only his eyes, inflamed and reddened by toxic propellant gases, stand out. Silently, he tosses heavy canvas bags and a thick leather map case onto the wet grass. The partisan commander, limping heavily, approaches the steel giant. He looks up at the haggard tanker from below. Captured ammo in the bags. Top secret plans for German reserve movements in the map case. Get them to front headquarters. The tanker's voice sounds hollow, echoing as if from the depths of an iron barrel. He speaks in short, clipped phrases, rationing the meager scraps of precious oxygen left in his soot-damaged lungs. "Brothers, stay," the partisan commander rasps, gripping the cold metal of the armor. "The Germans will be back by morning. We'll hit them together. I'll put you in for medals. At least tell me, who are you?" The Soviet officer looks right through him. War burned any need for cheap vanity out of these men long ago. This crew has become an entirely autonomous, functional component of their lethal war machine. Names and ranks were left behind in a distant, peaceful life. Here, in the cold Belarusian forests, there is only the specific objective and the means for its brutal elimination. "We have our own work to do." It isn't arrogance. It's a simple statement of harsh fact. The heavy steel hatch slams shut with a sharp metallic clang. Inside the scorching casemate, the grueling mechanical routine begins anew. The driver stomps on the stubborn main clutch with force. The diesel engine roars at max RPMs, belching a thick pillar of black smoke into the night sky. 46 tons of steel lurch backward, snapping the dense underbrush. The wide tracks shed clumps of mud mixed with enemy blood. The machine slowly dissolves into the impenetrable gloom like a ghost, heading for a new intercept point. The saviors vanish without a trace, but the brief respite doesn't last. The echo of heavy artillery blasts has already been pinpointed by German radio direction finders. The German command realizes all too well that a single phantom is inflicting irreparable damage, comparable to an entire tank regiment. Wehrmacht HQ decides to take extreme, unprecedented measures. Armored strike wedges begin to form rapidly around the forest massif. Motorized infantry battalions and heavy tanks converge into a single fire bag for Operation Wolf Hunt. The dragnet begins to tighten relentlessly. The German command throws a heavy armored group and a composite battalion of 500 elite soldiers into the forest. Operation Wolf Hunt enters its most decisive and bloody phase. Wehrmacht soldiers move in a dense, wary skirmish line, combing every meter of the wet earth. The distance between the heavy armored vehicles is closed to a minimum, per strict regulations. The damp woods fill with the barking, guttural shouts of officer commands, the baying of service dogs, and the continuous metallic clatter of hundreds of tank treads. They are cornering an elusive beast. They are absolutely certain that overwhelming fire density and massive numerical superiority guarantee their success. But the cornered 152mm Predator knows no panic. It prepares to rip out steel throats with its armor-piercing shells. Inside the 46-ton Soviet self-propelled gun, a literal, tangible hell breaks loose. The fighting compartment's extractor fan gave up long ago. The air has turned thick, like hot jelly, a cocktail of toxic propellant gases, suffocating diesel fumes, and concentrated human sweat. The temperature in the cramped steel casemate rapidly climbs past 50 degrees Celsius. There is physically nothing to breathe. Every crew member's chest is racked by spasmodic, dry coughing. This is a brutal fight, at the absolute limit of human physiology. The driver is working on the verge of total muscular collapse. His blackened hands are locked onto the stiff control levers like steel vices. Every gear shift is a titanic physical struggle against the scorching, unyielding metal of the transmission. The steering clutches groan under the extreme load, threatening to shatter at any second. Only the steel nerves and primal physical endurance of one man guide the massive machine blindly through a solid wall of ancient trees, navigating only by the narrow slit of the vision block. The breakout route has been calculated by the crew down to the centimeter. Ahead lies the narrow neck of a deep forest river and an old, reinforced wooden bridge. The German armored vanguard, driven by their commander's orders, rolls confidently onto the flimsy log spans. The enemy's medium tanks crush the damp planks under their tracks, and at that exact moment, the mathematically precise ambush is sprung. A massive HE charge, preset under the supports, detonates. The bridge instantly disintegrates in a giant, roaring pillar of filthy swamp water, black silt, and shattered pine logs. The lead German armored vehicles plunge with a horrific screeching of metal onto the rocky bottom of the deep ravine, flipping in midair and ruthlessly crushing their own crews under tons of mangled steel. The following Wehrmacht column slams on the brakes. Multi-ton machines smash into one another, deadbolting the only escape routes. The firebag snaps shut on the overconfident hunters themselves. Blinding yellow flames erupt from the pitch-black night. The Soviet SPG begins its methodical, merciless execution of the completely immobilized German column. Targets are selected with cold, surgical calculation. First, the vehicles with radio antennas are destroyed. A 152mm blunt-nosed, armor-piercing shell, weighing a monstrous 49 kilograms, easily punches through the frontal armor of the lead command tank. The vehicle erupts in flames, instantly decapitating the enemy tactical group. Communications are severed forever. The battalion command is wiped out with the very first shot. The monstrous shockwave from the blast shears off the commander's cupolas of neighboring vehicles, turning precious optics into useless glass dust. The second shot, with a deafening roar, rips apart the heavy armored vehicle at the rear. The German elite are boxed in tight on the narrow forest causeway. They fire into the void in a panic, blinded by the frequent flashes of their own guns, while an invisible sledgehammer methodically, strike after strike, pulverizes their vaunted armor into shapeless scrap metal. 3 AP left! 9 HE! The loader rasps, getting it out in a single breath. He spits black, soot-stained saliva onto the floor, which is littered with spent brass casings. His back has long since become one massive, throbbing bruise from the continuous weight of slam-loading the giant two-piece shells. "Copy that. Give me AP," the commander says dryly and evenly, never for a second pulling his inflamed, watering eyes away from the panoramic sight. "Driver, keep the RPMs up. Don't let her stall." The driver responds only with a low, strangled grunt through gritted teeth. With superhuman strength, he yanks the left lever toward him, pivoting 46 tons of armored steel in place with a crunch to line up a new shot. The veins in his soot-covered neck bulge, ready to burst from the extreme strain. The machine submissively obeys the iron will of an exhausted but unbroken man. Another shot. The brutal recoil of the massive gun shakes the cramped casemate. Another German tank is instantly transformed into a blazing gasoline crematorium for its crew. The deadly ring of encirclement is successfully breached. Leaving behind mountains of mangled, smoking metal and hundreds of corpses of elite Wehrmacht soldiers, the Soviet crew steers their heavy machine deep into the impenetrable thicket. The heavy tank diesel growls steadily, carrying the steel phantom away into the saving gloom of the Belarusian night. The surviving German infantrymen retreat in absolute panic, abandoning their damaged equipment and wounded comrades on the road. The massive military operation to catch the lone beast has failed spectacularly, turning into a bloodbath for the pursuers themselves. The exhausted, demoralized enemy armored column, having completely lost centralized command and radio contact, desperately tries to regroup its pathetic remnants. They hastily crawl back to a safe distance, away from this cursed forest. The German column desperately needs a brief respite just to grasp the full scale of the catastrophe. The German column's brief respite turns out to be not a long-awaited salvation, but a sophisticated form of psychological torture. The remnants of the elite heavy battalion slowly converge on a wide forest clearing, desperately hoping to find reliable cover in the thick, impenetrable darkness. The engines of the exhausted tractors and assault guns are hastily cut. The Wehrmacht crews collapse onto the damp, cold grass in total exhaustion, instinctively huddling against the cooling, protective armor. The air is unbearably thick with the acrid smell of recent fire, burnt motor oil, and metal shavings. The absolute ringing silence of the night presses on their inflamed eardrums far harder than the roar of the recent heavy firefight. This is not the silence of earned rest. This is the sticky, suffocating anticipation of imminent, unavoidable death. Tension hangs in the air like a thick curtain, making the hardened veterans of the Eastern Front jump nervously at every random snap of a dry twig. Officers smoke into their wool sleeves, deathly afraid of betraying their positions with the slightest spark. They sincerely believe they have miraculously escaped the pursuit. They have blind faith in the distance they've put between them and the cover of the night. Death never bothers with advance warnings. In a matter of seconds, the elite's sleepy stupor is shattered into bloody dust. The night thicket silently vomits 49 kilograms of pure, uncontrolled kinetic energy from its black depths. The 152mm blunt-nosed, armor-piercing shell traverses the dark space at a monstrous, all-crushing speed. Impact. The Vanguard heavy tank splits at the welded seams like a rotten nut under the blow of a massive steel sledgehammer. The monstrous, deafening explosion of the instantly detonating ammo rack rips the night apart with a blinding, retina-scorching pillar of white-hot flame. The multi-ton armored turret of the heavy German machine is sheared off its ring with a wild, unbearable metallic shriek. It is thrown dozens of meters, ruthlessly crushing neighboring half-tracks into a shapeless, smoking heap of mangled iron. The physics of this lethal strike are far beyond human comprehension. The crew of the stricken Vanguard tank simply evaporates at the epicenter of a localized hell, without even having time to register the fatal hit. The deafening roar of the blast immediately mixes with the frantic, gurgling screams of wounded soldiers and the dry clatter of wet earth raining down on the scorching armor. The contrast between the absolute night silence of the forest bivouac and the sudden, instantaneous annihilation shatters the psyches of the surviving soldiers into tiny shards. Panic, like an uncontrollable chain reaction, instantly sweeps through the entire column. This is no longer the organized retreat of a well-oiled military machine. This is the animalistic, uncontrollable primal terror of a herd before an invisible, absolutely invulnerable predator. Fire!
Fire all guns at the whole perimeter! Blanket the square! Give me suppressive fire!
The German officer's voice breaks into a hysterical, high-pitched falsetto. There isn't a drop of the old command steel in that desperate cry, only absolute, paralyzing helplessness in the face of the unknown. He gives the order to fire into absolute nothingness, knowing full well its fatal futility. The summoned artillery storm immediately plows the earth around the mangled camp. Dozens of heavy HE mortar rounds and artillery shells methodically grind the surrounding forest thicket into fine splinters. The explosions uproot thick, ancient pines and leave behind deep, smoking craters. The earth trembles continuously from the senseless cannonade. Tracer bursts from heavy machine guns ruthlessly but pointlessly tear the night gloom to pieces. The wall of fire lasts for long, agonizing minutes, turning the surrounding forest into a lifeless, churned-up wasteland. The German infantry huddles into the liquid mud, deafened by their own hysterical, disorganized fire. When the thick powder dust slowly settles and the cannonade gradually dies down, forward recon patrols crawl with shaking hands into the crater-scarred thicket. They desperately search for the mangled hulk of the Soviet SPG. They search for even the slightest, tiniest trace of the destroyed enemy to regain a shred of their sanity. But they find only the deep-pressed ruts of wide tank treads in the damp earth and one massive, smoking brass shell casing. The firing positions are absolutely empty. The lightning-fast, perfectly calculated withdrawal of the Soviet machine breaks the Wehrmacht veterans' psyches once and for all. The Predator delivered its surgically precise, crushing blow and successfully dissolved into the darkness long before the very first retaliatory shell fell on this cursed spot. In the ominous silence that follows, broken only by the dry crackle of the burning Vanguard tank and the death rattles of the dying, the German soldiers clearly hear only one single sound. It is the steady, low-frequency, pulsing throb of a heavy Soviet tank diesel, slowly, calmly, and inevitably receding into the impenetrable depths of the night. This steady sound rings out like a final, non-appealable death sentence. Every German tanker and infantry private now understands one thing with crystal clarity. There is absolutely no hiding from this steel phantom. It is physically impossible to run from it, and it is simply impossible to destroy. This invisible, merciless steel shadow will methodically, step by step, pick them off one by one until no one is left. The demoralized, bleeding column falls into a state of deep tactical stupor. Dozens of lost vehicles weigh like a heavy, unbearable burden on the shoulders of the German command. The hulks of the Wehrmacht's elite heavy armor now simply rust in the damp Belarusian forests. They have turned into hideous, scorched monuments to their own arrogance. Not a single scratch on the thick Soviet armor. Not a single wound among the nameless crew. 46 tons of alloy steel became an absolute shield. But the true weapon of victory proved to be the ice-cold, mathematically precise calculation of 4 deathly tired men. In the cramped casemate, reeking through and through of powder soot, sour sweat, and spilled diesel, There is no room for triumph or joy. A dull, ringing exhaustion locks their muscles tight. The loader's hands have turned into one solid, bleeding callus. The driver is half blind from the acrid propellant fumes continuously stinging his eyes. But their pulse beats in a single, steady rhythm with the heavy diesel engine. They aren't celebrating a victory. Methodically, their movements honed to automation, they reload the 152mm howitzer gun. They are preparing for more dirty work. At this very same time, in the German group's headquarters, protected by thick layers of concrete, an atmosphere of absolute doom reigns. High-ranking officers, generously decorated with iron crosses, stare silently at the spread-out topographical maps. The maps are heavily marked with red notations of irrecoverable losses. The Wehrmacht elite, who marched halfway across Europe, are forced to admit their total, unconditional defeat at the hands of a single Soviet gun. This brutal tactical fiasco snaps the spine of the German war machine across this entire local sector of the front. A heavy, helpless silence hangs over the field radio frequencies. The doomed radio traffic of the staff officers sounds like the humiliating reading of an act of surrender. Losses are absolutely unacceptable. We are burning our best armored reserves for nothing. I order an immediate halt to active search operations in the forest massif. Pull all surviving heavy equipment back to fortified garrisons. Transition to a tight perimeter defense and await reinforcements. The German general's voice in the radio men's headsets is completely devoid of the usual Aryan arrogance. It carries only the dry, naked admission of his own total impotence. The humiliating, shameful order is issued to the elite Wehrmacht panzer units. The professional hunters officially acknowledge themselves as the hunted prey. They hide cowardly behind concrete dragon's teeth, rows of barbed wire, and deep minefields. They sign off on their total powerlessness before the nameless professionals of night combat. The German armored armada tucks its tail. The wide tracks of the heavy Wehrmacht machines churn the forest mud with a panicked clatter. The enemy hastily retreats toward the saving walls of large settlements. But war never forgives weakness. The moment the enemy turns their back, the steel predator delivers its next, most brutal strike. It is a short burst of rapid, merciless action. The retreating German rearguard crawls heavily along a deeply rutted forest dirt road. 2 medium tanks and 1 half-track with infantry, bringing up the rear of the retreating column, cover the withdrawal. They stare into the impenetrable, terrifying blackness of the forest until their eyes ache. They desperately hope the nightmare has been left behind forever. They are fatally mistaken. 46 tons of night terror silently move into point-blank range. The Soviet SPG's engine is running at its lowest RPMs. Its muffled growl blends perfectly with the sound of the night wind in the thick crowns of the trees. The heavy gun is already laid directly on target. Range 200, HE, fire! The commander's short, clipped order triggers the relentless mechanism of destruction. The night gloom instantly explodes with a blinding yellow flash. 43 kilograms of explosives and metal, with a monstrous howl, bite directly into the vulnerable engine compartment of the trailing German tank. An explosion of colossal destructive power rips the rear of the enemy machine into tiny shreds. Heavy, white-hot chunks of armor fly in all directions, instantly turning into lethal, large-caliber shrapnel. A second heavy shell follows. The covering half-track is simply physically erased from the face of the earth by a direct hit. The thin 15mm German armor bursts like wet cardboard, burying dozens of enemy infantrymen alive under its burning wreckage. The third shot ruthlessly guts the remaining medium tank. Its turret is blown clean into a deep ditch.
A pillar of roaring, metal-devouring flame erupts from the open commander's hatches. The enemy rearguard is completely wiped out in 3 short minutes, without a single chance to return aimed fire. This lightning-fast, brutal execution from the rear finalizes the enemy's total tactical paralysis. German drivers at the head of the column floor it in absolute panic.
They abandon their burning comrades, desperate only to reach the safety of fortified garrisons. The Soviet crew didn't win simply through superior caliber or the impenetrable thickness of their frontal armor. They won through icy, flawless calculation. They won through the sticky, primal, animal fear they had sown deep in the souls of the occupiers. The enemy's psychological breaking point has finally reached its zenith. The mechanics of engagement have been replaced by the physiology of terror. The will to resist is broken. The German elite have crawled like cowards into deep holes. But the nameless Soviet tankers have no intention of stopping now. Psychological warfare is pushing past every conceivable boundary. Under the cover of impenetrable darkness, 46 tons of armored steel prepare to execute a maneuver that defies every military field manual. This psychological onslaught is pushing past every conceivable boundary of standard tactics. Under the thick shroud of the black, impenetrable Belarusian night, 46 tons of alloyed steel perform a maneuver that contradicts the very physics of heavy machinery. Audacity is the highest form of combat mastery. The driver guides the massive self-propelled gun at the dead-low RPMs of its heavy diesel engine. It is a deadly precision glide of a multi-ton behemoth through a dense tangle of branches and thick trunks. Every microscopic turn of the stiff steel levers is calibrated to the millimeter. Wide metal tracks silently crush the damp forest moss. They do not let out a single treacherous clank. The engine gives a low, guttural thrum, barely audible on the verge of a total stall. They crawl right up to the Wehrmacht's deeply echeloned, fortified positions. The distance rapidly closes to a few dozen meters. Through the narrow slits of the observation devices, the dark silhouettes of long-barreled German anti-tank guns are clearly visible. The enemy's guns are securely tucked behind high earthen berms. The slightest, tiniest mistake with the stiff clutch, one careless, loud exhaust pop from over-revving, and all 46 tons will instantly turn into a stationary steel target to be slaughtered at point-blank range. The tension inside the cramped, sweltering fighting compartment reaches critical mass. The crew holds their breath. The tankers greedily swallow the thick air, saturated with diesel and soot, trying not to make a sound. Left steering clutch, smooth as silk. Another half meter, exactly. The commander's barely audible, dry, cracked whisper cuts through the ringing, dead silence of the fighting compartment. Got it. The exhausted driver exhales just as quietly through gritted, grinding teeth. The muscles in his blackened hands have seized in a brutal iron cramp from the extreme strain, but with split-second precision, he kills the steel giant's massive inertia. Enemy guns at 3 o'clock. Crews are out cold. Minimum range. The machine freezes in the pitch-black, impenetrable gloom. It blends perfectly with the black contour of the forest. The commander, avoiding even the slightest creak of the hinges, silently opens the heavy armored hatch. He slides smoothly down the cooling, rough armor into the tall, damp grass. In his tightly clenched hand, the cold metal of a fluted bayonet glints dully. Like a silent, gliding shadow, the Soviet tanker covers the final, most dangerous meters to the first line of enemy trenches. Just 1 meter away, leaning heavily against the cold, torn metal of a German artillery tractor knocked out the day before, a filthy, exhausted sentry is fast asleep. His rifle lies uselessly on the ground. The Soviet officer does not kill this soldier. Death in one's sleep is too simple, too easy an out for an occupier. He does something far more terrifying and destructive to the psyche of an entire army.
With a short, sharp, ruthless strike, he drives the steel blade of the bayonet straight into the scorched, warped German armor.
Exactly 10 centimeters from the sleeping sentry's head. Pinned to the cold metal by the blade is a piece of thick, gray paper. It is a dry, emotionless, deadly ultimatum. A sentence signed by the Wehrmacht's nameless midnight executioners. The tanker vanishes back into the darkness just as silently and swiftly, returning to the warm gut of his lurking steel beast. The self-propelled gun slowly, centimeter by centimeter, reverses and disappears into the forest. The cold, gray morning ruthlessly exposes the true scale of the night's humiliation. The German sentry struggles to pry open his inflamed eyes. His sleepy gaze immediately hits the dull steel of the Soviet blade and the scrap of paper with crude, blocky German words. The realization of what happened hits his mind harder than a direct hit from a large-caliber, high-explosive shell. They were right here. They stood directly over him. They could have slit the throats of the entire gun crew without a sound. They could have tossed grenades straight into the open tank hatches. But they simply left this mark, demonstrating their absolute, total control over the lives of an entire military unit. The sentry's wild, blood-curdling scream wakes the sleeping camp. Animal, paralyzing terror instantly spreads through every trench and dugout. This is no longer just fear of a powerful 152mm gun. This is a sticky, maddening horror of the omnipotence of an invisible phantom that comes from the void and takes lives at its own discretion. The demoralized, broken German division snaps completely and irrevocably. Hardened Wehrmacht veterans, who had survived the bloody hell of the Eastern Front, flatly refuse to take their combat posts. The orders of frantic officers are completely drowned out by mass, uncontrollable hysteria. No one wants to stay in this cursed, death-soaked forest for a single second longer. A chaotic, shameful, panicked rout begins. Soldiers hastily abandon heavy crew-served weapons. They leave behind entire crates of precious artillery ammunition and iron rations. Surviving vehicles tear away from carefully prepared positions with a strained roar, ruthlessly smashing through their own engineering obstacles and crushing tents. Overnight, an elite Wehrmacht panzer unit turns into an unmanageable, crazed mob. This mob flees blindly toward the west, toward Minsk, abandoning their wounded. The psychological war is won outright. The enemy grouping is destroyed from within without a single shot. The sector is completely and unconditionally cleared of the occupiers. The massive self-propelled gun stops in a quiet forest clearing, safely hidden from prying eyes. The sector is completely and unconditionally cleared of the occupiers. The massive self-propelled gun stops in a secret forest glade with a long, bone-jarring metal screech. This hideout is securely tucked away from prying eyes by a thick, impenetrable wall of ancient spruce trees. 46 tons of sweltering alloyed steel freeze in the pre-dawn gray gloom. The absolute ringing silence hits the eardrums harder than the recent barrage of artillery fire. The surrounding air slowly cools. The massive, long barrel of the 152mm howitzer gun emits rhythmic, metallic pings. It is the white-hot metal surrendering its accumulated, deadly heat to the cool Belarusian morning. Above the ribbed armor plates of the engine compartment, a thick, hot shimmer trembles continuously. The fresh scent of pine needles timidly tries to break through the heavy, suffocating stench of burnt diesel, spilled hot engine oil, and acrid, lung-searing cordite fumes. Inside the cramped steel fighting compartment, 4 deathly exhausted men slowly come to their senses. Their faces have long since turned into impenetrable black masks of ingrained soot, filthy sweat, and thick gun grease. Their coarse soldiers' tunics are stiff as boards from soaked-in salt and dried mud. Their hollow exhaustion is so deep and all-consuming that it is no longer felt as physical pain. It has become the absolute natural state of their worn-out bodies. The mission is a success. The elite enemy grouping is shattered, completely scattered, and irrevocably demoralized. By every written rule and law of military science, they should establish radio contact right now, report their exact coordinates to front headquarters, and return in triumph to the safety of the rear. Waiting for them there are gold stars of heroes, high-ranking medals, hot food, clean, dry clothes, and several days of life-saving continuous sleep. Promotions await them, their names to be solemnly etched into the High Command's victory bulletins. Glory is already reaching out its greedy hands toward them. But this nameless crew is made of men of a different, iron breed. The psychological naturalism of brutal, soldierly brotherhood completely excludes any display of cheap human vanity. In their minds, war is not a pageant or a theatrical stage for heroic monologues. It is an endlessly filthy, unbearably hard, bloody job of systematically and methodically exterminating the enemy. These cold, calculating professionals know one simple truth with absolute clarity. The war is not over as long as a single armed occupier treads this soil and is physically capable of breathing. The inner core of these grim tankers is forged from the same merciless steel they pierce so easily. A man's duty doesn't call for loud ovations or public recognition. It demands only one thing: the non-stop, ruthless continuation of their deadly work. Foregoing their earned glory is their entirely conscious, icy choice. The dry snap of broken branches at the edge of the woods suddenly rips through the fragile morning silence like the crack of a cattle whip. A straggling German patrol of 5 men stumbles clumsily into the clearing from behind the thick tree trunks. Their gray uniforms are torn to shreds, their eyes wild and wandering, rifles dangling uselessly on their shoulders. These are the pathetic, fear-crushed remnants of the Wehrmacht Panzergrenadier Company destroyed during the night, blindly wandering by a broken compass due east in a desperate hope to break through to their main forces. They freeze in their tracks, completely paralyzed by a primal, muscle-locking terror. Standing silently before them is that very same invisible midnight executioner in all its monstrous, material, tangible power. 46 tons of imminent death stare at them through the black, gaping void of a giant artillery barrel. There will be no mercy, no pointless attempts to take exhausted prisoners. Pity is an impermissible criminal luxury in this filthy war. Inside the cramped, sweltering fighting compartment of the Soviet machine, there is no room for sentiment. The short, abrupt, clanking sound of the tank machine gun's bolt being racked. The gunner doesn't even bother to change his posture. He simply, cold-bloodedly, almost mechanically, presses down hard on the metal butterfly trigger. A dry, deafeningly crackling burst of heavy machine gun fire instantly rips through the damp morning air. 12.7mm lead ruthlessly shears through human flesh like a circular saw. The German soldiers drop like sacks into the tall, wet grass, turning into shapeless, bloody piles of meat before their trembling fingers can even flick the safeties on their personal weapons. The short, surgically ruthless annihilation takes exactly 3 seconds. The dynamic fire contact ends as abruptly as it began. The forest clearing sinks back into a heavy silence, broken only by the gurgling death rattles of the fallen enemy. Inside the armored fighting compartment, absolutely no one pays the slightest attention to this fleeting mopping-up action. The crew is occupied solely with the routine check of all mechanical systems before the next decisive forced march. No unnecessary emotions, only the continuation of monotonous, grueling work. A dry, clipped exchange of short phrases cuts through the cordite-filled gloom of the fighting compartment. "Report exact diesel remaining in the tanks." The commander's voice sounds flat, hollow, and colorless, like the dry creak of rusted door hinges. Enough fuel for exactly 80 kilometers of hard marching across broken forest terrain, the exhausted driver reports abruptly, strictly rationing his breath, his blackened, blood-scuffed hands never leaving the stiff steel control levers for a second. Status of the combat load, the commander continues his dry, automatic interrogation. Exactly 8 blunt-nosed armor-piercing and 14 heavy HE frag shells left in the rack, the loader replies just as hollowly, spitting bitter saliva mixed with acrid gunpowder dust onto the shell casing-strewn metal floor. Ready for further work. This sector is completely cleared of the enemy. There will be no return to rear front headquarters. Coordinates for our next target, a German heavy armor crossing at the nameless hill, exactly 40 kilometers due west. Copy that. Coordinates confirmed, sights are set. The gunner's voice doesn't waver. It carries only the icy calm of a death machine operator. Driver, start the engine. We're heading west. The heavy tank diesel roars with a new, fierce, primal power, greedily belching clouds of thick black smoke into the gray morning sky. Wide tracks ruthlessly grind the damp earth along with the mangled bodies of the German patrol. The massive, self-propelled gun pivots heavily in place and crawls slowly but inexorably toward the front line. The crew voluntarily vanishes into the gloom of the forest thicket, forever striking themselves from every award list and staff report. Their anonymity is a conscious, firm choice. They depart into absolute uncertainty, finally transforming into a pure, unadulterated function of total enemy destruction. This machine has become a mystical enigma. The mystical enigma of the steel phantom forever became the foundation of one of the most striking and unsolvable mysteries in the history of the Great Patriotic War. Decades after the victorious May of 1945, hundreds of meticulous military historians and gray-haired archivists made countless desperate attempts to uncover this secret. They spent days on end until their inflamed eyes burned, sifting through tons of staff documents yellowed by ruthless time and crumbling into dry dust. With magnifying glasses in hand, they carefully studied the dry, sparse, clipped lines of the daily combat reports of Soviet fronts and advancing armies. They desperately searched for tank regiment numbers, encrypted call signs of battery commanders, expenditure logs for heavy artillery ammunition. Any clue, however tiny or insignificant, that could lead them to the trail of the 4 cold-blooded professionals of night combat. But all their colossal, titanic efforts shattered time and again against the hollow, impenetrable, absolutely monolithic concrete silence of the military archives. Not a single official report exists on the phenomenal, unbelievable results of the night sweeps in the Belarusian forests. Not a single award list for this specific nameless crew, which single-handedly destroyed dozens of heavy armored vehicles of the Wehrmacht's true elite. They simply left behind absolutely no paper trail, not a single stroke of a staff officer's pen. The only material, physically tangible traces of their deadly, filthy, unbearably hard work are the blurry, grainy German photographs that miraculously survived the fires of war. Dull black-and-white snapshots taken by the shaking, sweaty hands of terrified, utterly demoralized Wehrmacht officers. Frozen forever on these time-yellowed photo cards are giant mountains of mangled, shredded, twisted metal. Multi-ton tank turrets ripped from their rings and thrown dozens of meters away from burnt-out hulls by the colossal force of explosions. The thick frontal armor of heavy German tank destroyers, once considered absolutely invulnerable, smashed inward. The charred, mutilated hulks of the pride of Nazi tank engineering, left forever to rot and rust in the damp, impassable forests. These silent photographs are the most eloquent, most objective, most honest statistics of enemy death. Historical memory brings us back again and again to that hot June of 1944, a month smelling of acrid cordite and spilled diesel. A dynamic, brutal, pulsing montage of resurfacing memories of night battles repeatedly cuts through the thick historical gloom. Blinding, retina-scorching flashes from the heavy 152mm gun in the pitch-black forest darkness. The deafening, guttural roar of the powerful tank diesel. The rhythmic metallic clank of the heavy sliding block breech, non-stop swallowing massive shells. The piercing screech of Krupp steel tearing along its welded seams. The frantic screams of German tankers burning alive. Burning armor, belching thick black smoke, illuminating the cratered forest tracks with hellish flames. The deafening roar of explosions. 49 kilograms of pure kinetic energy multiplied by icy calm, ruthless retribution, and the absolute automatism of trained male muscles. This grim crew of the heavy self-propelled gun was never a random victim of some clerk's tragic blunder. Their absolute anonymity is not a bitter tragedy of unfair oblivion to be wept over. They voluntarily, entirely consciously, and cold-bloodedly erased their own names from every possible victory dispatch and award list. They flatly refused the loud, ringing glory, the gold medals and decorations glinting in the sun. For real grim men, for true professionals of the most terrible war, the best reward is not a piece of stamped metal on a sweat-soaked tunic. The best reward for them is the finally broken steel spine of the hated enemy. They understood perfectly well with their grim soldiers' minds that true history is forged through hard, exhausting labor, acrid sweat, strained backs, and bloody blisters in cramped, sweltering, armored fighting compartments. Their choice is the highest, unreachable form of selfless, soldierly service to their fatherland. It is a grim, unyielding man's duty, performed to the very victorious end without a single unnecessary word of complaint. Their voluntary rejection of personal fame turned these four tankers into something much greater. They wrote their filthy, hard work directly into eternity. They became an immortal legend, a punishing steel phantom, the embodiment of the very spirit of brutal retribution. A hard point of pride is forever etched into our history. The memory lives in the very fact of our victory.